Welcome to First Downs and Touchdowns. I'm your host, Nate Skinner, here with my good friend, Wesley Uhler of Steelers Audio Network. How are we doing today?
What's going on, Nate? Good to see you. Looking good. I'm doing just fantastic. I'm a little tired from that delay on Sunday night, but getting closer to being back to full health here.
Back to 100% on the injury report.
That's
Tired.
right. That's right. They Steelers got a lot of bodies down, but they don't have to worry about me. I'm ready to go.
Not like the injury report we got from Mike Tomlin today.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
We'll get to that later, but Wesley is off that injury report. But we are going to start with our favorite team here. West Virginia dominated Oklahoma State 38-14. What is your thoughts on the game post-game?
Yeah, I think that was the most Mountaineer-like performance in terms of the team that we saw last season down the stretch when WVU was playing the best football it's played under Neil Brown. Early last season, WVU goes to Penn State, gets handled by the Nittany Lions, but then goes on a long win streak, ends up losing to Houston, going on a long win streak again to have that 9-win season last year. The offense really got humming about this time last season. Garrett Green was injured there in the backyard brawl, so he missed some time. So kind of same thing. Took the offense till week 5, week 6, week 7 to really get off the ground. But once it did, they were running for 250, 300 yards a game. They were scoring 30-some points a game. And I think, Saturday in Stillwater was the closest we've seen this season to that last year. Jaheim White was finding every seam, every crease, so slippery, so twitchy like he was last year. CJ Donaldson looks healthy. He looks physical. He looks strong. He was bullying people.
He said, get out the way.
Garrett Green doing his, when he's kind of at his best, his wheeling, his dealing, his freelancing, making the throws when they're there, tucking it down and running it when it's there. Nico Marchiol comes in seamlessly for a few drives. Lead scoring drives, has a great run of his own, touchdown pass. Other than the fact that Nico's a lefty and Garrett Green's a righty, like if you squinted your eyes, you couldn't really tell that we had a different quarterback in for a few series. The offense kept humming. And then the defense. Listen, a big part of the defense under Neil Brown now, which has been a big sample size as a head coach, right? He's in year 6 as a head coach now at WVU. Is that this defense is good when they can force takeaways and they struggle when they can't. And that's not groundbreaking. That's the same case about a lot of football teams across college football and in the National Football League. Finally, this defense starting to have some splash, starting to force some turnovers again as well, too. You had that 17-0 lead in the first half, right? But then Oklahoma State gets a big kick return. They hit a couple quick first downs. All of a sudden, they're in the red zone. It's still the first half. You're up 17-0, but it feels like, okay, Oklahoma State, they score quick here, and all of a sudden it's a game again. What happens? You pick them off, interception in the red zone, and then you go down the field and score again. And from that point, it felt like, okay, it's still the first half. There's a ton of football left here, but it was feeling like the Mountaineers Saturday. So that was a long-winded answer, but it was, I think, again, last year when we saw WVU playing its best football that they have under Neil Brown, it started to look a little bit like that again on Saturday in Stillwater. Best they've played this season by far, obviously.
I really thought they found their groove, not just in the rushing game, but you could see they were trying to hit some deep shots to Traylon Bray, who I'm a fan of. He stretches the field well. But this defense, I was a little shocked that Jeremiah Trotter had another son. And that UVU.
This one might be better than the one who went to Clemson, honestly.
Yeah, that toe tap interception was incredible field vision to know where he is at in the exact moment, because a lot of defenders won't see that white line and be like, I got a toe tap, but he knew instantly right where he was. And another guy I want to talk about is the Troy transfer, TJ Jackson. The fact he came in and can allow us to pass rush with Bradley, he just really allows this pass rush to get going. He just makes his impact. Like, though we lost the backyard brawl, right? He made an impact in that.
He was outstanding. Yeah.
He makes his impact, and it allows guys to just tee off. And when
And you know what? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
and when you have a guy like that in the middle of your defense, it really opens up the defense to play free, you know? That's how I see TJ Jackson in this defense.
No doubt. Last year, the transformative newcomer for the WVU defense was Beanie Bishop. And he obviously had such a good year that, he's got himself a starting job in the National Football League right now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This year, I mean, Josiah Trotter was with the team last year, but got injured before the season even started, so had to take a redshirt year. I mean, that was his 6th college football game. That's what's so impressive about Josiah
He looks
Trotter.
good for 6 games.
He's played 6 games in his college football career, and he looks like he's played 60. Like, he looks like one of those seasoned 5th-year middle linebackers who makes 120 tackles a season. You know what I mean? And he is just now got onto his second set of fingers of being able to count how many games he's played. TJ Jackson is the opposite. He's that proverbial, played a few productive years at Troy, and now at the end of his career finishing off at WVU. And yeah, he, again, Nate, to kind of hearken to some of the past of when Neil Brown has had good defenses, he's always had that disruptive guy in the center of that defense. It was Darius Sills, who was Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, had a cup of coffee in the NFL with the Raiders and the Chiefs. And then Dante Stills, his younger brother, who was a 4th or 5th round draft pick of the Cardinals and now starts for the Cardinals and actually had a really good game against San Francisco this past Sunday in his second year in the NFL, really starting to come into his own. So Neil Brown, when his defenses have been at their best, they've had that turnover factor and they've had that disruptive guy in the middle of the defensive line. And that's what they had Saturday. That's what they, I think, have had in part for a good portion of this season. But yeah, I mean, TJ Jackson has looked every bit of the part. He's impressive. He's nasty. And it's another one of those football things, right? When you've got a disruptive force like that on the interior of the defensive line, it's a problem. There's enough of those guys that can cause havoc from the edge, right? But there's not a ton that can do that from the interior of a defensive line. It's a valuable skill set, and that's what TJ Jackson has brought so far through 6 games.
I also enjoy
seeing 5 games. 5 games. 5 games. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I also enjoy seeing what Trey Latham can do. He also provides another factor. Number
6 games
4.
or 5. Wait, sorry, my math is off.
6
No, it's
games.
been 5. It's 5.
Oh yeah, 5 weeks.
Yeah, Penn State, Albany, Pitt, Kansas, Oklahoma State. So Josiah Trotter's played in 5 college football games. Sorry, he's still on his first set of fingers counting how many college football games he's played. That's insane.
Yeah, but I think another good element and variety to this defense is Latham. Number 4 on that defense is another dude. You put him with Trotter. I mean, those two just fly together. It's one goes one way, the other falls right behind, and a running back isn't getting too far. But the biggest part of this game that's good for WVU going forward, 9 of 15 on 3rd down. Your best 3rd down efficiency to start this season. If they can continue that and have long drives, they had 42 minutes of time of possession. Oklahoma State had 17.
Yeah, it's crazy.
and if you're telling me WVU can keep up with that, run down their throats, make the big shots, and just play to their element, this is going to be a West Virginia team that's going to be hard to stop. And will slowly make its way to the top of the Big 12, which is very competitive right now, as you know.
Yeah, it's wide open in that regard, and you've started 2-0, which is a good place to be. You've got 2 of the big dogs now coming to Morgantown. Obviously, the big coal rush game, number 11 Iowa State, and then the very following Saturday, 7:30 night game all over again against a ranked Kansas State team. Nate, I think the best part of the dramatic comeback victory against Kansas a week ago, and then again, what you could argue the most well-rounded, maybe not best win, but best start to finish performance of the Neil Brown era in Morgantown, which isn't exactly the highest bar to clear, but it's still something, is that it feels like you've gotten the attention back of the fan base, and you've got a chance, especially if you play well in these next 2 games, to recapture the momentum you had coming into this season. Remember leading up to that Penn State game, I mean, You won 9 games last year. You bring a large portion of that production back. Everyone's excited for this year. You're opening against Penn State. You get the big noon kickoff. McAfee does his whole Friday show there. ESPN basically lets McAfee do his own game day from the middle of Morgantown on Friday afternoon. All that momentum rolling into the season. You fall flat against Penn State. You lose the backyard brawl in heartbreaking, frustrating fashion. And it felt like all that momentum was zapped in 3 weeks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in 2 weeks, all that momentum was gone. You've gotten 2 wins now. Everyone's kind of back paying attention, and all right, maybe we're on to something, and maybe those first 3 games of the year weren't necessarily who we are. Teams are allowed to get better. Teams are allowed to get worse. Teams are allowed to get better. Maybe we just had a slow start to the season, and that's not who we are. This is who we are, who we've shown the last 2 weeks. You go and take care of business against Iowa State, all that momentum is going to be back. You play well in these next 2 weekends. You still have yourself positioned to contend to get into the Big 12 championship game. You got a real opportunity. And that performance on Saturday in Oklahoma State is a big part of the reason why I think a lot of people who jumped off the bandwagon, I don't want to say are jumping back on the bandwagon because they haven't accomplished anything yet, but they're starting to get some people believing again, which is a good place to be.
Oh yeah, when your fan base gets back and they're seeing what you're doing, it's good to see. And if you can beat Iowa State and Kansas State, man,
You'd be ranked.
momentum.
You win these next 2 games at home, you beat 2 ranked teams, 2 top 20 teams. You'd be sitting at 5-2? And yeah, you'd probably be number 23, 24, 25 in the country, something like that. And I tell you what, the last couple home games against Baylor and UCF would be electric. And you'd be at Halloween all of a sudden, and you'd be 4-0 in conference play and with, in the driver's seat to earn a bid in the Big 12 championship game. I don't think any of us would have thought that was going to be the case after that collapse in the backyard brawl. So well done to start the conference slate here. Let's keep it going and under the lights in the coal rush on Saturday night.
I'm excited to see those uniforms. But now we're going to take a quick look at the game because, I'm doing my research to look at Iowa State and see what they have to offer. I looked at their running backs. They have 3 capable running backs. They have Jalen Jackson, Abu Sama, who, if you've seen him when he played Kansas State, went for 3 touchdowns that one year. I was watching that snow game. Phenomenal player as a runner. And then they have Carson Hansen. Those 3, when I put the stats together, 137 carries, 748 yards, 5.4 yards per attempt, and 5 touchdowns. Now, how do you think WV should guard a rushing attack like that?
Well, it's a very good question. The good news is this is the 3rd straight week that you are playing an opposing offense that, make no mistake about it, their success is predicated upon running the football, right?
Correct.
I mean, Kansas, it was Devin Neal, a guy who's going to play on Sundays. Oklahoma State, it was Ollie Gordon, a guy who should be playing on Sundays. I don't know why he came back this season. He should be playing in the NFL already, making that money. And then now against Iowa State, they don't necessarily have a guy with a resume like those 2 have in college, but they are a football team that is predicated upon running the football and has had success doing so. They are undefeated this season. They are ranked number 11 in the country for that reason. So that's the good news, is you're sitting in the same church that you have in terms of your meetings of we have to stop the run. If we want to do what we want to do as a defense this week, if we want to limit this offense, if we want to have success, we have to stop or at least contain the run. I mean, you know how it is. Defense in football in 2024, it's not necessarily the same dominating defense that we grew up with, where you hold teams to under 200 yards and they only score 6 points. And that's just much harder to do in modern football at all levels, where offenses are so advanced, quarterback plays so much better than it's ever been before, all these different things. And the leagues now are tailored and governed to help offenses score points. You got to do what you've done the last 2 weeks, and that is keep talented run games and running backs in check. Use that in turn to make the opposition throw the football. Now, against Kansas, you weren't able to – well, you did have 1 interception, to be fair. Tyron Bradley had the interception. and then multiple against Oklahoma State. So, I mean, once again, I guess that is proof in the pudding. If you can slow down these run games and force these quarterbacks to throw the football, turnovers happen, good things happen. 3 over the last 2 games, and then you add in the Tyron Bradley strip sack, which was because Kansas had to throw the football. So really 4 turnovers that they forced in the last 2 games that started with stopping the run and forcing teams to drop back and pass. You got to be able to do that again. Rocco Becht, talented quarterback for Iowa State, still young, came onto the scene for them last year as a true freshman, now in his second year. His dad, Anthony Becht, is a WVU legend, was a first-round pick of the New York Jets back in 2000. His dad is going into the WVU Hall of Fame Saturday as he plays the Mountaineers. He comes from a WVU family, so maybe he's a little distracted. Maybe he's just got a lot going on in his noggin, worried about his dad, worried about his parents, all the family in town to watch him play on the road at the stadium. He grew up, going with his dad on alumni weekends and things like that. Let's get to Rocco early. Listen, I love Rocco Becht. Great young kid. I wish him all the success in the world. 11 games a year, not this one. Let's get to them early. And again, just same kind of script that you followed the last 2 weeks, and you're going to have a chance to win this one, and you're going to, I think, be able to do what you want to do on defense.
I think gap security and maintaining the edge is going to be crucial in this game when you
No
have
doubt.
backs that can hit you at all different angles. But when you look at this receiving core, there's 2 names that stick out. You have Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. Noel, he's got a couple touchdowns, but it seems like the guy that's put up points for them is Jaden Higgins. So what I did, I looked at the WV secondary. Maybe put Jacoby Spells on Jalen Noel, but Crandall or Garnes versus Higgins. When you look at Neal, where do you think he's going to put secondary guys to guard these 2 specific wide receivers in the offense?
It's a good question. I don't know if they're going to have one person shadow him exclusively. I do think Garnett Hollis has been, or Jacoby Spells would be the guy that you would want to line up most. But the thing, it's a good question. It is. And I wish I was sitting in those meeting rooms and could give you a great answer. But I think, again, that would be my ideal scenario, would be to get him lined up against Jacoby Spells or get him lined up against Garnett Hollis as much as possible. And to just hope that, again, Nate, you know this, it's been a big Pittsburgh Steelers philosophy, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to have a stud corner who's shutting a guy down all the time if you can get after the other team's quarterback. That takes care of you. You need a guy who can cover for 2.5 seconds, and just while we can go hunt the quarterback. If TJ Jackson keeps doing TJ Jackson things, if Tyron Bradley looks like the disruptive force that he's been off the edge and has been forcing turnovers, Sean Martin has had, I think, a good start to the season. Quiet, but good start to the season. If they can disrupt the front like they did against Oklahoma State, like they did against Kansas, you're not as worried about a secondary that has been shaky at times. The secondary, of course, looked great on Saturday, forced turnovers on Saturday. Big part of that was the chaos caused up front in the box, right? Those things, it's a copacetic relationship. They, as one goes, the other goes type thing. So yeah, that's what I would be trying to do. I would be trying to make sure it's Spells and Hollis as much as possible. And then I would know we have to get after Rocco Becht. We can't give him 3, 4, 5 seconds to sit back there because they've got the wide receivers that can get open and make you pay for it.
I think when you look at this defense, you're going to have people like Burks and Joseph in the back end, which should definitely help the secondary. I think a guy like, Burks, unfortunately, he had that injury in that Kansas game. I'm glad he's back to normal. That was scary for a second. But Joseph, the way he played that pass last week, he knew right where Bowman was going. And you can tell that's just his ball hawk skills kicking in. And if you can have him continue to do that, that back end is going to be more secure as the season goes on. But this Cyclones, as we transition to the Cyclones defense, there are some interesting things about this defense. They have a defensive lineman like J.R. Singleton, 3 sacks and a forced fumble. He is their team leading sack guy. When I did some research, 97 pass rush snaps, 64 run snaps. So it seems like he's a better pass rusher than he is run stuffer. So I would say if he's not in the game, I think you got to use the trio of White, Donaldson, and Green to just push the ball towards first downs. And I still think you got to continue that formula.
Yeah, absolutely. Running the football is where this team, we talked about some of the things that this team was doing, well last year when they were playing their best football, and running the football was certainly amongst them. I mean, WVU had the best rushing attack in all of Power Five last year in college football, third in the entire college football based on yards per game. They rushed for well over 200 yards per game. And yeah, Zach Frazier was a huge part of that, and Doug Nestor, right, who are on the Steelers and one's on the practice squad. But they still got some dudes on that line right now who are going to play on Sundays as well too. Wyatt Milam, who's one of the best left tackles in college football. I mean, Nick Malone's had a great start to the season. Brandon Yates has been strong. All these guys deserve credit. Thomas Remack is starting to get a lot of national love from the Pro Football Focus and those type of grading websites of the world. Now, you're not going to be able to run for 398 yards every single week like you did Saturday in Stillwater.
That was incredible.
But if you could consistently be over that 200 mark, if you could be in the 210, 220, 230 range consistently, like, again, you were starting this time last year down the stretch, it's a very tough offense to beat, because once that starts happening, you have the guys. You have Jaden Bray, you have Traylon Ray, you have Hudson Clement, you have Cole Taylor, guys that can make plays downfield when they're in single coverage and when you can take some shots when teams start loading the box. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's certainly the formula for the offense.
I think what's interesting is this secondary for Iowa State, 8 interceptions by this defense, and 3 guys both have 2 interceptions. That's Porter, Cooper, and Williams. And I think when you have guys like that in your opposing secondary, Garrett Green is going to have to be careful about throwing some risky passes, because there's a couple times this season he throws a pass where you're like, ooh, that was close, and he is very accurate, but you're going to have to be cautious around a secondary like Iowa State when you have 3 guys that have found the ball when they've been in the right spot. And I think that's when you have to use Cole Taylor. Very, very big fan of him. His tight end skills, I think you got to utilize here. You let your receivers run, let Clemente run and do his thing. But maybe use the tight ends, utilize the tight ends this game, and throw Iowa State off their game. They're going to expect the receivers to, do their thing. But if you can, have the defense forget about the tight ends and move the sticks that way, I think that's how you can get the win this weekend.
When you've scored 32 and 38 points in your last 2 games, it's tough to complain about the play calling of the offense, if you will. Yeah. But I would still like to see more shots to Cole Taylor, downfield, up the seam. He has got a big body, as you mentioned. He's got that ideal prototypical tight end size. He's got speed for a big guy. He's got good hands. Again, when you've scored 32 and 38, it's hard to complain. I'm not complaining, but that is one thing that I would still like to see: more targets, more downfield shots with Cole Taylor, especially when you're running the football the way that you are. Give me a little play action, give me a little RPO. Let's hit the big boy for some, even if it doesn't have to even necessarily have to be bombs down the field every time. Give me some of those intermediate routes, those 10 to 15 yard routes, right? But then maybe he catches what would be a 14-yard completion. He breaks a tackle or 2, and all of a sudden it becomes a 30, 40-yard completion. Again, not complaining. Just saying
I'm not either.
That's the one thing I would still like to see.
I'd like to see us hit him down the seams. The seam routes with Cole Taylor, I think, could be another option you bring to this offense as the season goes on. And if you can get everyone firing on full cylinders, the Big 12 is going to be in for a difficult game against West Virginia. It's just something that will be interesting to see as the game goes on. It's like Mike Tomlin and Bill Belichick always telling you, focus on one game, and that's exactly what WVU has to do these next 2 games. Focus on Iowa State. If you beat them, don't think about the Big 12 championship. Focus on Kansas State. And I think if you can focus on those 2 games, game by game, week by week, And if you can win those games, I think the confidence just skyrockets. When you have a team that beats two ranked opponents, you really start to feel the energy in the room go from, oh wow, that first half of the season was rough, but you really start to build confidence. And if you get a confident Garrett Green and a confident WV offense with this defense that evolves, West Virginia will shock some people in the Big 12.
Think so. They got a big opportunity. You get both of these games at home. Um, yeah, and I mean, honestly, in general, you don't have to travel a ton the rest of the way. I mean, you do have the trip to Arizona in what, like 3 weeks, which is pretty far. But you got 4 more home games the rest of the way. 7 games left in the season. 4 of those are at home. One's in Cincinnati, which is not far at all. So I
No.
mean, you really only have one more further lengthy road trip to go. It's a real opportunity. They have been fortunate enough in the health department. Everybody's got people banged up, but they haven't had any colossal injuries to this point. As you mentioned, even with some guys like Aubrey Burks, where it looked like they might have, they've dodged bullets at times, and it's been smaller issues, nothing that's going to keep anybody out for a long period of time. So yeah, and I think you've got a fan base that's hungry to get that momentum back, like we talked about a few minutes ago as well. So big opportunity, 1-0 every week, singularly focused. Go get it done.
Now to stay in the college football realm, how about the SEC this year? When is the last time you've seen the SEC be competitive? You have Texas ranked, Georgia ranked. You have Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Missouri, all in the
Missouri.
top 25. When's the last time you remember the SEC being this competitive?
Well, it's always great at the top, right? But I think it's insanely. I mean, you bring in Oklahoma and Texas, 2 of the better programs in the country, 2 programs that are pretty much. I know Texas had their years where they struggled, but it seems like they've shaken that off. Oklahoma has been consistently good the entire 21st century. I think they've had one losing season in 24 years here in the 21st century, and I think in the last 25 years they've only had like 3 times that they didn't win at least 10 games. Like Oklahoma is crazy consistent as a program. You throw that into what is already, the SEC. Yeah, it's been nuts. Tennessee is humming. I know they just lost, but Tennessee is humming as a program. Missouri is humming as a program. Both of them much better than they've been recently. Georgia, Alabama, LSU, what they always are. You throw in Texas, you throw in Oklahoma. A&M's really good as well too. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how it all shakes out. I still wouldn't write off Alabama. I know a lot of people are. I still wouldn't write off Alabama. And we know Georgia is going to be great. And then a lot of other teams who legitimately have their hand in that pile. It's a fun year to follow SEC football. That's for sure.
Well, when you finally have teams like Alabama and Georgia not just headlining that conference and you have a lot more variety and a lot more competitive teams, people are going to go to the SEC network. They're going to watch a game on ESPN from the SEC because you got a lot of good quality football games now that a lot of programs are starting to shine and find their groove. And when I think about the race to Atlanta in December, Alabama has a tough end of the schedule when it comes to ranked opponents. They have Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, and Oklahoma. And then in Oklahoma as well has some tough stretches as well. They have Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, and LSU. They have the most difficult road to Atlanta coming up when you have to face 5 of the SEC
Yeah,
opponents
that's rough.
left. And eventually when a lot of these teams play each other, it will, settle the conference out. Now, if you had a prediction of who's going to be in the SEC championship game, who are your best, opponents that you think will make it to Atlanta come December?
It's a good question, man. I mean, it's hard. Listen, I know this is so chalky, but it's hard not to pick Georgia and Alabama, right? I mean, just
Yeah.
what they are as programs. If we both said right now Georgia doesn't lose a game the rest of the regular season and looks pretty comfortable doing so, maybe they have a game in there that they win by 7 points, something like that. But for the most part, they beat everybody by double digits convincingly. It wouldn't surprise us. Again, I know a lot of people are jumping ship on Alabama. I still think Kalen DeBoer is a great head coach, maybe one of the most underrated in college football, even though he is now the head coach of Alabama, which is the preeminent job of college football. He's going to have those guys ready to respond and ready to go as well, too. So, again, I know that's the chalk answer, but I think it's also until proven otherwise. While the SEC is as deep as we've seen it in a while I think Texas certainly belongs in this conversation, and they maybe now have a little bit of an advantage too, as they are still undefeated in conference play. I would still, if I was at a casino, I would want to stay away from this bet if I was at a casino. But if I had to put a chip down, I think we see that rematch from last year. I think Texas still need maybe a year or two to get integrated, although I will say, whether it's Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning, Texas has great quarterback play, which obviously makes a huge difference. But I still think I'm going with the incumbents here, Nate, to use a election season term, as boring as that might be.
Well, think about Georgia and Alabama. They produce storyline and storybook ending games where you're like, what is going on? Like just recently, we had a game that Ryan Williams has that game-winning touchdown.
Crazy.
You know, you're up 30-7 at one point. They kind of went into cruise control, which I wasn't a fan of. They got a little too conservative play calling wise. But then Georgia storms back. Alabama gets a field goal to get 33 points. But then, you know, Georgia was knocking on that door to say, let us in. But the fact that Bama responded in that game, it was like a complete storybook ending. We've been here before. That's the feeling you get during those games when it's highly contested, close games. You sit there and you're like, we've been here before with, you know, Georgia and Alabama, whether it's the national championship, the SEC championship games, like we've seen it so much lately.
Yeah.
It's like a story that you can read and you're like, that was a great book, you know? And I think for me, I think Tennessee might be my sleeper pick to get to Atlanta.
Good pick.
That Nico Iamaleava, I think that's how you get it. That's the pronunciation. Don't quote me. I've tried to sit there.
I'm rolling with it.
You know, I sit there and try to listen to the YouTube video of his pronunciation. It's a difficult one. But if he plays to the level he is, then you have Dylan Sampson at running back, who's been a monster. You looked at him in that Oklahoma game, the stuff he was doing in that game to help out. It's just Tennessee is that team to watch out for. And, you know, Texas with Steve Sarkisian, you know, he's going to have that program firing off. And, you know, it's going to be fun to watch what happens in the SEC. It's just one of those conferences that everyone tunes into. It's like the AFC North. AFC North football's on. Everyone's going to go from watching the game to be Ravens, Steelers, Browns, Bengals, like last week. You know, that's what the SEC is in NFL terms. You know what I mean?
Sure is. Yeah, a lot of different teams. I mean, last year, right? AFC North had 3 teams make the playoffs, and the Bengals were the first team out. They were the next team, you know, that would have been in, even despite missing Joe Burrow all year. So yeah, SEC, they're gonna have at least 2 or 3 teams in the playoff. You never know; they might even get a 4th somehow. But yeah, I mean, we hardly mentioned LSU. We hardly mentioned Ole Miss. Like, there's some really good teams in that conference this year.
Gotta love Jackson Dart. I've seen a stat. He has 2,100 passing yards right now. He'll be a quarterback to watch in this upcoming draft. Potentially a Steelers draft guy. I'm not gonna speculate, as Mike Tomlin would say. I'm gonna let you guys speculate. I will do that, Mike Tomlin, as I do per usual. But yeah, and this weekend we are treated to 3 phenomenal games, starting with the Red River Showdown. You know,
great one. Traditionally at noon, right? Forever.
Yeah.
And now that they're in the SEC, they said, no, you got to play it at 3:30. And I think probably the younger Texas and Oklahoma fans were excited about that. More time to sleep in, more time to pregame and get nice and hydrated. I think the older Texas and Oklahoma fans are probably treating it like it's an apocalypse. Like, what the hell do you mean we're kicking off at 3:30, not at noon? But this, to me, listen, it's hard to say it's underrated as a college football rivalry because it's Texas and Oklahoma. But I don't think it gets the same respect as Michigan, Ohio State. I don't think it gets the same respect as Notre Dame, USC, as maybe Alabama, Auburn in the Iron Bowl. I think, as funny as it sounds, like this is the most underrated rivalry in college football, besides maybe the backyard brawl, of course. Like this is perhaps the best rivalry in college football, and people rarely put it in the conversation when you have that debate. Both teams are ranked in the top 20. It's always at a neutral site there, right? At the Cotton Bowl, at the Texas State Fair. I know neutral site when it's in Texas seems kind of weird, but it's off campus for both teams. They split the stadium down the middle, right? It's burnt orange on one side. It's that Sooner crimson red on the other side. It's a great environment. It's unlike Michigan and Ohio State, which feels like one team always dominates it. Unlike Auburn, Alabama, which feels like it's been one-sided. This every year, it's like a one-score game. It's back and forth. It's great. I think Texas wins this year. They got one stolen from them last year. Only game Texas lost all season, of course, until they fell in the playoff to Washington. I think the Longhorns. I almost did it. Did you see that? I almost put the horn up. I can't even do it. I think the Longhorns win the first SEC edition of this Red River rivalry.
You know, I'm going to miss Gus Johnson calling the game at noon because Gus Johnson is just, you think of Red River game, you think of Gus Johnson down the sideline and all that exciting. Exactly.
Murray.
Oh, I love Gus Johnson when he does like big games, you know, he just brings that energy. But when you think there was a game during COVID, went to a shootout at one point, and they just produce high quality games, you know. And I'm a big fan of the red, you know, of this game. It's just produces,
it's great,
you know, some fiery competition. You got guys that want to hit the daylights out of each other, and that's the type of football I love. Is the tough physical rivalries that, you know, when you look across that sideline, even if you know a friend from high school that you went to school with, you look across that sideline, you say, "We'll talk after the game," and that type of energy, when you know two teams want to come out with a win and they don't want, obviously no team wants to lose, but when you see both teams come out that way, that's when you see some games where it comes down to the wire. When you have football that comes down to the wire constantly, especially in a rivalry like this, Texas has Quinn Ewers coming back, which should, if you watched him in that Michigan game, he looked calm, cool, collective, made the right reads. Isaiah Bond is entering this rivalry. He went from, you know, being the hero of the Iron Bowl last year to now he's putting his name into the Red River rivalry, you know? And that's the guy that Texas is fortunate to have transfer there. They just bring a lot of good talent this year, you know. I'm going to be ready to watch this game. This is a game that if you turn the TV on at 3:30, you will be locked in. And I don't know what you look forward to most about this rivalry when it comes every year.
Probably the fact that one of the fan bases is going to be pissed off no matter what happens.
No, that is always funny. Maybe
I wouldn't say I hate either of these teams, but I obviously had to deal with them 11 years or 12 years as a WVU fan. And they're great programs. They're much better programs than WVU. I'm not denying any of that. Okay, that's all up front. I do not deny facts. Okay, but what's also a fact, not an opinion, is that both of these fan bases think they're Alabama, they think they're Georgia, they think they're Ohio State, but they're not. All right, Texas hasn't won a national championship in nearly 20 years. Oklahoma hasn't won one in over 20 years. Great program. But the fact that one half of that stadium, either the Crimson or the Crimson and Cream or the Burnt Orange, is going to be leaving miserable, that makes me happy.
Oh, yeah. Now, another good game we're going to be treated to is Ole Miss and LSU. Great game. Two quarterbacks. You have Jackson Dart, and then you have on the other side Garrett Nussmeier. Or Nussmeier. Two quarterbacks that have thrown a lot, because when I was doing some statistics research, I seen that these quarterbacks have thrown almost 200 times. Jackson Dart specifically has thrown 173 times, but is 73.4% accurate, has a completion percentage of that. And when you have him on one side and you have Nussmeier on another side completing almost 70% completion on his side, this is going to be, I have a feeling this is going to be a shootout. I don't know if you caught last year's game. That was ridiculous. I
Mm-hmm.
think both teams were close to 60. I think Ole Miss put up 60 something. And when you have a rematch from last year, sign me up. I'm ready to see these two teams fire it up again, because when you get a great game last year and then you get another one this year where both teams are ranked, it's going to be a 7:30 game. Now we have another 7:30 game that we'll be
Yeah.
talking about next. So they
Yeah,
really
they're
made pick
stacking
and
them.
choose this time. And I don't know,
It's a big college football Saturday. There's a lot of ranked matchups.
what are you looking forward to in Ole Miss LSU? What environmental factors are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, this one should be a shootout, as you mentioned. This is not your grandfather's Ole Miss and LSU SEC matchup. This are two teams with offensive-minded head coaches with good quarterback play. Jackson Dart's been doing it at a high level in college football for a long time. First at USC and now at Ole Miss. LSU, obviously, I mean, just had Jaden Daniels win the Heisman last year and now lighting it up for the Commanders. Brian Kelly knows how to coach quarterbacks. He's got a good track record of producing those guys. Should be a shootout, should be a lot of fun. And it's kind of one of those, listen, we're getting to the time of the season where the great teams start to separate themselves from the good teams, you know? And
Yeah,
these are good teams, but this is kind of around the time where you separate. I don't want to say like it's not an elimination game by any means, but if
no.
you're one of these two teams and you already have an SEC loss and you want to play in an SEC championship game, is that your goal this year is to get to Atlanta? You better win this one, you know,
It's
because you're gonna have a lot of tough games down the stretch. You better win this one. Whoever wins this game is going to feel, you know, very good about their chances going forward and kind of at the halfway point of this college season. Whoever wins this will be ranked in the top 10 right next week. I'm sure if LSU wins, they'll end up moving up a few spots. Ole Miss obviously already there. So this is a big one in terms of, again, one of those separation Saturday type vibes of one of these teams is still going to have all their goals in front of them. The other one is going to be, you know, working uphill a little bit the rest of the way.
I like Ole Miss to bounce back. When you lose to a team like Kentucky, now Kentucky, they've competed with Georgia tightly, and then they snuck out a win off a
Yep.
fumble that went for a touchdown.
Yep.
But when you're Ole Miss and you take a loss like that to a Kentucky team that isn't there just yet, they're not a terrible program, but they are not there yet. I expect Jackson Dart, Trey Harris, a lot of those guys to come out firing this game. And for Ole Miss, if you're serious with Jackson Dart about going to Atlanta, like you mentioned, this is a must-win game, because if you lose to LSU and you take another SEC loss, Jackson Dart, he'll play the rest of the season, but he'll enter the draft a little bit early and won't play a bowl game if they're in one. So I think the pressure is more on Ole Miss than it is LSU, especially when you got a top 5 quarterback from this year's draft. It's more on him than it is LSU in their program.
Yeah. Well said. I think you're right. You know, it's weird too. Both of these teams kind of felt like this was their year coming in, right? It's year 3 for Brian Kelly. His third year at Cincinnati, they went undefeated and won the Big East and ended up playing Florida in the Sugar Bowl. His third year at Notre Dame, they went to the national championship, ended up losing to Alabama, but went undefeated and went to the national championship. Now it's his third year at LSU. A little bit of a flat start, but still all your goals right in front of you. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's got this thing humming. We got the quarterback in Jackson Dart. Good transfer class, good portal class this offseason. It's time now to get to an SEC championship game. And again, you know, two programs that kind of fancy themselves as this is the year for us to get to Atlanta, and you know, two programs that still have a very good chance to do so if they can win on Saturday night.
I think Ole Miss will win this game 35-31. I think that we're going to get a thrilling showdown. It's going to be a shootout still, but I think Ole Miss pulls it out because Jackson Dart is going to have that chip on his shoulder to win against LSU. Now, the best game of the evening we are about to talk about, Ohio State and Oregon. This time, they're not meeting in separate conferences. They're meeting in the Big Ten. First Big Ten showdown. You know, what do you expect out of Ohio State and Oregon? Do you expect a shootout? Do you expect a closely contested game? What do you see in this game Saturday night?
Yeah, I tell you what, this is these are the kind of matchups you love in college football. Two top five teams, hostile environment. It's going to be chaos. Um, I think Oregon is very good and a legitimate threat to win the Big Ten and maybe a national championship. I think Ohio State, if I was a college football head coach and you could give me any roster of any program, it might be Ohio State. I would have to think about Alabama, particularly with Jalen Monroe, with the quarterback who I do think is better than Will Howard. Like that would be the only question for me at Ohio State. So I could get
Yeah.
a better quarterback somewhere else, but and not that Will Howard is bad, but I could get a better quarterback somewhere else. But the rest of the roster, man, is just flawless. I mean, everybody rightfully so is talking about the freshman wide receiver from Alabama, but they need to be talking about the freshman wide receiver from Ohio State.
He's phenomenal.
Jeremiah Smith is just ridiculous. Geno Smith's nephew. He is just outstanding. He put on an absolute show in East Lansing against the Michigan State Spartans last week. So this to me, not different extent of Ole Miss and LSU, because whoever loses this game is still going to be ranked in the top 10 and is going to have still all their goals in front of them. But man, these are two legit national champion contenders, legit Big Ten contenders. And it's two head coaches, I think. Dan Lanning different from Ryan Day, because I don't think Dan Lanning has any issues with job security, where in a weird way, despite coaching the number 2 team in the nation, Ryan Day certainly could be fired this year if things don't go well over the next couple months.
I could see it.
It's this is the 5-star matchup. I think Ohio State has the edge on the defensive side of things. I think Oregon has the edge on offensive side of things. I don't know who has the coaching edge. But this I think should be a lot of fun. This has potential to be and I know we just saw one, as you referenced earlier, that crazy Alabama Georgia game, about a week and a half ago. This has potential to kind of be like that, one of those college football game of the year type games. Two great programs, two legit top 10, top 5 teams, two legit national champion contenders. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I know there's a lot of talent on these defenses, but I'm going to just give folks what each team has on offense. Obviously, Will Howard for Ohio State. Then you get to Quinshawn Judkins, stud. Travian Henderson, stud. I mean, Jeremiah Smith, if you watched him against Iowa make a one-handed easy grab like it was nothing. And then Emeka Ibuka. I thought he should have went last year, but he has certainly improved his stock this year. He can run block. I watched somebody cut up his film, and I was watching him block. He was just throwing people.
Yeah.
But you got that talent. Now you go to Oregon. Dylan Gabriel, he made his transfer. He made the Bo Nix, path. You start a lot of games. You make your way to Oregon. Then running back, Jordan James. He is a stud at running back. But then you get to the wide receivers, Tez Johnson, who last year showed flashes, certainly. That was an Oregon team that had a lot of talent, so he kind of was under the radar. But Tez Johnson, he's not showing flashes anymore. He's showing legit talent. And then you get to Evan Stewart, who transferred from Texas A&M. He's also a stud. So I expect a lot of fireworks on Saturday night with these two offenses. And even with Ohio State getting some help in the back end with Caleb Downs, who came from Alabama, I think this is going to be an offensive showdown. Too much talent on each offense.
Agreed.
To really have a defense. It will come down to a defensive stand, though. I think whatever defense can cause turnovers or whatever defense can make a stop, that's what it's going to come down to at the end of that game.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's going to be one of those last kind of whoever has the last possession is going to have the last opportunity to win the game. That'll be a lot of fun on Saturday night.
Now, here's the unfortunate news. Now we got to move to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not something fun to talk about at this exact moment, but the Pittsburgh Steelers took a heartbreaking 1 a.m. loss after the rain delay, 20-17 loss versus Dallas. Still a lot of questions I'm deciphering. The Mike Tomlin press conference was today. Said a lot of interesting stuff. What'd you take away from the Mike Tomlin press conference that happened at noon today?
One, Steelers are really banged up. I mean, Mike Tomlin kind of ran through the laundry list of guys already that he's ruling out for Sunday, and a lot more that are doubtful. And two, I think there's a real opportunity that we might see Russell Wilson. And if it's not this weekend against the Raiders, I certainly think it could be at home against the Giants the following week. Mike Tomlin expected him to be a full participant when they start practices Wednesday for this week. That's the first time we've seen that. Like last week, he said he expected an uptick, right? But Russell was still limited at the start of the week. This week, he's saying he's going to be a full participant going on Wednesday. And that is not, I don't think, any type of indictment on Justin Fields. That's a completely different conversation. I think you could argue Justin Fields has been the best performer on the Steelers offense so far through 5 games. But I always think unless Justin Fields looked like a dang MVP candidate and just blew their doors off, I always think the plan was to go back to Russ. And when you hear Mike Tomlin, it sounded a little bit different last week, and it sounded a lot different this week. I think there's a real opportunity for that on Sunday in Las Vegas. But like I said, I would definitely expect Russell Wilson to be under center sooner rather than later for the Steelers, sometime here, at least in the month of October.
I think Las Vegas is quite possible. If you can get 3 full participant practices this week, he looks good. Mike Tomlin is obviously going to have the difficult decision of who do you start. But here's the thing that gets lost in translation about Russell Wilson. You sign him to a 1-year deal. You're not paying much. The Broncos are paying the majority of that contract.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the defensive guys advertised and made a huge statement about recruiting Russell Wilson.
Correct.
So this is where I start to think, are these defensive guys now, they might love Fields, but is that where they say, where's our guy at? Not that, Fields has gone bad. He's played phenomenal for the team so far, up to good quality of play. But when you recruit a quarterback of Russell Wilson's caliber, Super Bowl caliber, Pro Bowl caliber, when you have that guy that your defense recruited, at some point you got to make the turn before the defense turns on you.
No doubt.
I thought one of the interesting things that was from Mike Tomlin's press conference is the George Pickens debacle. He didn't want to, go in depth on what they talked about, which is a very respectable move. It's a Mike Tomlin thing that he's always stood on business with, that he's not going to tell the media. But one thing that is a tiny bit concerning is he was not mad about what George Pickens put on his eye black. I think you got to be a little bit concerned of his actions, especially at the end of the game. You see he pulls a guy down by the face mask. But what do you think of the whole snap limitation thing, or the, management?
Yeah, look, Mike Tomlin can say whatever he wants, and he should. I mean, he should not tell the truth. I don't want to call Mike Tomlin a liar, because like, someone who's a liar has legitimate intent to harm and to manipulate when they lie, right?
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin's just protecting his football team. He's just protecting his locker room. He's just trying to quell chaos, and that's fine. That's in the head coach job description. So I don't want to say Mike Tomlin's being a liar, because it's just way too heavy of a word to use for someone who is trying to throw cold water on a story to the media. That's fine, all right? The media can get over it. They can not have their feelings hurt that Mike Tomlin's not going to throw this guy under the bus. That's just what good head coaches do in every sport at every level. So he's not a liar, but he's not telling the truth either, Nate. Like, he knew what George Pickens had on his eye black. He knows all the details of everything. Mike Tomlin has been the head coach of the Steelers for nearly 2 decades. Exactly. He knows everything that goes on in that building, let alone with his own players and what they're writing on their eye black and all that different stuff. He knows all of it. They've talked about it. They've gone over it. There's a reason why George Pickens played only 59% of the snaps. Okay, something is going on. I don't need Mike Tomlin to tell me that to know something is going on. There's these things called context clues. There's these things called reading the tea leaves, right? I don't need him to stand at the podium and eviscerate George Pickens for 5 minutes for me to know that there's something going on. There is something going on, and it's fine that Mike Tomlin, that's the one side, right? The other side of that is it's fine that they are doing everything they can to keep that in-house and not let this blow up to something public. That's fine as well, too. Everybody doesn't have to act offended that Mike Tomlin is doing the thing that every smart head coach ever has done. Because the final piece of that, too, is let's say, God forbid, they are considering moving George Pickens as part of a Devontae Adams deal, as part of whatever. You really want Mike Tomlin to go to the podium and say, we can't work with this guy. He's an a-hole in the locker room. He doesn't listen to anything I say. He's uncoachable. And then maybe you're trying to trade him in a couple weeks. Like, and I don't think that that's what's happening. Let me be very clear with that. But for a million different reasons, Mike Tomlin shouldn't go to the podium and eviscerate George Pickens. He could do that in the locker room. He could do that in the film room. He can do that in a private meeting with George Pickens. He knows what's going on, though, and there is something going on. Without a doubt. You can't ignore that at this point. He is by far their most dynamic, talented, and productive offensive weapon. And he played 59% of the snaps on Sunday night. You don't need to pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Okay. I can see that you're peeing on my leg. Something's going on.
I think what was also another interesting tidbit from this was Mike Tomlin. Somebody asked him a question about blocking in the receiver, and he goes, we'll leave that to Van Jefferson. You're telling me you don't want George Pickens. Forget where we are now with him. Do we not remember what he did in that Seattle preseason game to show us what he's potentially capable of? That you don't want him being a lead blocker? And I get there's something going on a little bit, but you're telling me you don't want him to develop as a lead blocker and use his skills to put people into the turf? That's the thing that's concerning to me. Not that Van Jefferson is bad. He's playing a little bit of that Allen Robinson role. It seems like at the moment, not high production in receiving, but he's the lead blocker. But I think at some point you got to try George Pickens in that role slightly if you want this run game to be fixed, because he maybe could fix that a little bit, give it a spark. I don't know what you think of putting George Pickens as a lead blocker right now to spark this run game possibly.
Well, I don't know about that. I would be looking towards Roman Wilson if I wanted to put a wide receiver, although we haven't seen him, and that's another thing that's going on. But yeah, I don't think that that's a concern. Listen, last year, George, rightfully so, came under a lot of fire for not blocking against Indianapolis in a game that the Steelers coughed up a 13-point lead and ended up getting blown out in Indy against a not very good Colts team. And he responded well in that regard the rest of the season. That's the one still encouraging thing to me about George is he's had too many of these instances already in his young career, but he has responded well in the past. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt to do that again. But what they need to do is just get him the football. Okay. Exactly. And again, I don't know what's going on. If he's acting like an a-hole in practice all week, I get it. You got to do something. You know what I mean? But if we really want this offense, the best way for this offense to get a spark, to take a step forward, to start games better, to score more points is George Pickens. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Getting a healthy Jaylen Warren and Cordero Patterson to have more options in the run game would certainly help. Using Freiermuth over the middle of the field more would certainly help. Maybe Roman Wilson, someone emerges as another wide receiving option, would certainly help. Who knows what Russell Wilson looks like? I think you and I both agree Justin Fields has been encouraging. He certainly has not been the problem, but Russell Wilson could still be better. But the easiest thing that they can do to get this offense to take a step forward is to get George Pickens going and get him the football. I mean, again, I'm not privy to everything that's going on. If he's being an a-hole in practice and in meetings all week, I understand it. Maybe, okay, I understand not just going out there and game planning around him when you can't trust him like that. But it's, man, like this feels like kind of a breaking point. You either got to get him back focused and engaged and catching the ball 5, 6, 7, 8 times a game and putting up 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 yards a game and the focal point of the offense, or this could be the beginning of the end. I mean, like, I think we're coming to a crossroads. You can't continue to just try and make this thing work and just try and give it time. Eventually, it's got to go one way or the other.
Oh, I definitely agree, but I also think even if you don't get Devontae Adams, I think you got to, if the Jaguars are not going to be good, I'd reach out for someone like Christian Kirk.
There's plenty of guys available. And you
Exactly.
know what, too? Devontae Adams is a different conversation because he's a bona fide number one wide receiver in this league. He's got Hall of Fame credentials, but it doesn't have to be a guy like that. It can be somebody who could come in and be a very good number two for George Pickens. It could be another Deontay Johnson type. It doesn't have to be a perennial all-pro and a guy who's, one of the best of his generation. It doesn't have to be a stud like Devontae Adams. It doesn't even have to be someone like Brandon Ayuk. You know what I mean? Like, it can be somebody who is a solid, productive number two who gives you an upgrade on Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin and also just takes some attention away from George Pickens. It's the one thing that I didn't love about getting rid of Deontay Johnson. I know he's got his flaws, but he's a legitimate NFL wide receiver that commanded attention from an opposing defense. Right now, they got two pass catchers that really command attention from an opposing defense. It's George Pickens and it's Pat Freiermuth, who's a tight end. They need somebody else in that equation.
I like a Christian Kirk type build. Now, Christian Kirk, I remember when he got that contract, I thought he was a little bit out of that payday. Look what he's done as a wide receiver one. And I think you could get Christian Kirk out of Jacksonville if they're going nowhere. I think he could be a guy you add to your list. You put a nice little star next to the list and say, if Jacksonville's out of it in a couple of weeks, because they're 1-4, if they're 1-6, pick up the phone. They have Brian Thomas Jr., who's starting to become the number one or, become their guy slowly. But I think if they're 1-6, you got to pick up the phone and say, what do you want for a guy like Christian Kirk? Because you put him next to George Pickens, I think that's even like you're saying, it doesn't have to be a Devontae Adams guy. It can be a Christian Kirk. It could be maybe you reach out to Houston, John Mechie, who I know he's gotten, thrown down the depth chart, but he's a better capable guy than the other two you have. And this isn't throwing Calvin Austin under the bus. He has shown up in some games, but he's not an every down wide receiver in the NFL. He can play the slot, but he's not an every down NFL guy.
Correct.
So, that's how I feel. What do you think of Christian Kirk if he were to come to Pittsburgh?
I'd be fine with that. I'm fine with anybody that's a clear upgrade on what they've got, and he's a clear upgrade on what they've got. I mean, it's that simple. It's that simple for me at this point. I could probably come up with a list of 20 people that I would be happy with here, and I'm not that concerned about the money. Everything that they did this offseason was about winning right now. That's why you went out and got a 36-year-old quarterback. That's why you extended Cam Hayward, extended Pat Freiermuth. That's why you went out and paid Patrick Queen. That's why you went out and got Deshaun Elliott. Like, the list goes on and on and on. Everything they did was to win this year. Go get another piece for the offense, because TJ Watt ain't getting any younger. Cam Hayward ain't getting any younger. Minka Fitzpatrick ain't getting any younger. You're going to have to pay Joey Porter Jr. eventually. Continue to do what you have done, and that is try and put the best product on the field. Just give me somebody. It doesn't even have to be, someone who's been to a Pro Bowl 7 times. Like, just give me somebody that's a clear upgrade on what you got.
I think that's where I stand. I think the one concerning thing was like you said, you traded Deontay. I was frustrated that day I wasn't more frustrated. I was more shocked and confused why we made that, because now you look, we didn't have a contingency plan afterwards.
Correct.
It was reaching for Brandon Ayuk, and where does Brandon want to go? What does Ayuk want to do? And that was the headline. It felt like for months, and it kept dragging and dragging, and they didn't look elsewhere. So now we're stuck with this. So, I think the trade works both sides. Dante Jackson, a couple picks this season.
Yeah, no, Dante Jackson. I got no problem with Dante Jackson. He's been a solid player, but the offense needs more help than the defense does.
Exactly.
Defense has got a lot of dudes on it. Offense ain't got many. Get him some help.
I think we could. We'll get you out there. Put you at wide receiver 4.
No. That's the opposite of getting a dude. That's getting another Jag. They don't need any more Jags. I'm just another guy. I'm not even just another guy.
Now, to wrap it up here, we're going to look at the NFC West. Interesting division so far. Who would have thought the Rams are at the bottom of the division? The Cardinals and the 49ers are in the purgatory of the division. Then you got Geno Smith and the Seahawks.
Seahawks kicking themselves after letting one get away this week.
Yeah, and here's where we look at the division. the Seahawks' next three opponents, this goes for the 49ers for the first one. The Seahawks, 49ers, Falcons, Bills, Cardinals, Packers, Chargers, Dolphins, 49ers, Seahawks, Chiefs, Cowboys, which is brutal.
They've all got rough schedules, man.
And then the Rams have the bye week. And then after the bye week, you have the Raiders, Vikings, and the Seahawks. Who do you think has a better chance of taking a lead in the NFC West?
I mean, I'm still going to go with the Niners. I mean, this is similar to the Alabama-Georgia conversation. Like, until proven otherwise, I'm going to believe that they're going to be able to get it done when things get thick at the end of the season. But I tell you what, the Niners ain't the same without Christian McCaffrey. They just aren't, man. And like, he's seeing doctors in Germany and stuff. I don't know if we're going to see him all this year. That's just a bizarre situation.
Oh, yeah.
Without him, the entire offense hasn't looked the same. Brock Purdy hasn't looked the same. The pass game hasn't looked the same. Their defense is still solid. They're still well coached. I'm still going to go with the Niners. But anybody in that division, legitimately, I don't think it would surprise me. I mean, Arizona, it would surprise me a little bit just because of what they've been. And I still think they might be a year away from being ready to take that leap. But Kyler Murray's talented. They've got some pieces around him. They've got a solid enough defense. They are right in this thing. They're starting to believe. If Seattle can get healthy, I think they've got they are decimated on the defensive line. Like all four of their starting defensive linemen were out against Detroit. And then I think 3 of the 4 were out against the Giants this past week. That's tough. I mean, you're missing 3 of your 4 stars on the D-line or all 4. I mean, people are going to be able to run the ball against you, and that's what's happened the last 2. Jared Goff threw the ball 18 times, and the Lions scored 700 points on Seattle. Like, that's how dire it was in the trenches for Seattle. I think they'll get a little bit better on defense once they get healthier. They've got the pieces on offense. I mean, they got the weapons at wide receiver. Kenneth Walker's a good running back. Geno Smith's a good quarterback. So I would say right now, I still think the Niners are the favorite to take it. I would put Seattle second, though. Rams, it just feels like one of those years. They've just been decimated by injuries, too. And Matt Stafford, while he's still effective, isn't getting any younger. I don't think he can really carry the team on his back anymore like he could at one point. So, yeah, give me the Niners, but I think the Seahawks are going to be right there in this thing, too.
Well, you got the Seahawks making Amon-Ra look like Randall L. in the game.
Good Lord.
But
Good Lord.
I think the Cardinals, if we're going to look at their next 3, they have the best position to set themselves up for success because, the Packers, that's going to be a tough matchup. The Chargers, depending on the health of Justin Herbert, seeing how he heals and how that offense plays. But having the Dolphins right now on your schedule should be a gift. Look at them without Tua. That offense looks lost.
Brutal.
You have Tyreek Hill, who's a monster speed demon, as people say. And it's like they need to, maybe call for Bryce Young. Make something. Make sure you see something like that. But my pick, I think it's going to come down to the 49ers or Seahawks. The 49ers will eventually figure things out. They're in the rough figuring it out phase. They're figuring out life without CMC. This is life without CMC. He could come back late season, maybe mid-season. He could come not back till next season.
Yeah.
So they're figuring out life without CMC, which is difficult. But if the Seahawks, like you said, get healthy, I see them up there. But the Rams, you lost Puka, you lost Kupp for way too many games. Now, if it was a game or two, you have a chance to bounce back. Maybe you get one of them after the bye. I think Nakua might be coming back. I believe.
I think so.
But I think when you look at this division, because it's interesting, everyone at the beginning was like, give me the Rams, give me the 49ers. But it's funny to see that the Seahawks, despite what's happened, top of the division, and then you have a bottom 3 where you're just unsure and seeing where things go. And listen, like you said, it's like the Georgia-Alabama thing. It's probably going to come down to the 49ers-Seahawks game because it's just those two teams have solid coaching. I like Mike McDonald for the Seahawks. We're pretty familiar with him. If you if you watched the Ravens game last year, you know who he is. But yeah, and I just, it's one of those things to see. Maybe the Cardinals surprise us all. It's a year of surprises. I mean, look at
They certainly could. Certainly could.
It's the year of surprises. You have Sam Darnold, who has a 5-0 Vikings team. Like, I guess it's 2024, the year of mystery.
It's such a year. Listen, it's such a year-to-year sport. I mean, every sport is a year-to-year sport. We see that in every league, but especially the NFL. Like, there's so much turnover. There's so many little variables that if you get one moving in the right direction for you, it can make all the difference in the world, right? Like, particularly quarterback play. That's what makes the specific NFC West conversation intriguing too, is because, I mean, every team is pretty solid at quarterback, right? Stafford has got a great resume, Super Bowl winner. Kyler Murray, we all know, has put it together at times, not consistently, but has talent through the roof. And then Geno Smith, the past 2 years, has been a Pro Bowler, thrown for well over 3,000 yards, handful of touchdowns every year. And then Brock Purdy, who's taken a team to the Super Bowl and is in line. Again, not an elite quarterback in the league, but is a good quarterback in the league, aligned to get himself a nice extension this offseason. That makes it interesting too, when you've got pretty legit quarterback play from every single one of those teams.
West Virginia living good right now. 2-0 in the conference. Geno Smith's balling out.
Leading passer in the National Football League, baby.
What's better than Geno Smith leading the league in passing?
You know what's better is me seeing the intros on NBC on Sunday night and Zach Frazier, West Virginia, and it says ranking 4th out of 32 in the NFL. How about that? 4th highest ranked rookie, fourth highest ranked center as a rookie. So yeah, listen, not a bad time. Not a bad time.
You know what? Forget Jaden Daniels. Forget Caleb Williams. Zach Frazier is the offensive rookie of the year right now.
That's right. Give some love. Give some love to the centers, baby.
Oh man, where can we find you?
Yes, sir. I host the Steelers Blitz on the Steelers Audio Network, noon to 2. You can get it on your iHeart app or website. You can get it on the Steelers app or website. Fox Sports Pittsburgh locally if you are in the Pittsburgh area. I also do In the Gun, which is a WVU show, WVU podcast with Owen Schmidt, who played 5 years in the NFL and was a legend at WVU, a Sugar Bowl and Orange Bowl champion. And then Jed Drenning, who is the sideline reporter now, played for Rich Rodriguez back before he was the WVU coach in the 90s. Sideline reporter for WVU. So In the Gun podcast for all of the Mountaineer and Big 12 conversation as well.
And where can we get at you on Twitter?
Yes, of course, at Wesley Uhler is where you can find me on Twitter. I tweet out all the links to all the podcasts, all the shows, and everything on there as well, too.
Get with my boy Wesley, one of the best in the game. He always brings top-tier quality talent. And
thanks, man.
He's a production master. You can also hear him on the show before.
That's right. Yeah, I produce In the Locker Room with Max and Wolf and get involved there. I mean, I do the halftime reports on the Steelers broadcasts. You hear me doing some stuff for the Pens occasionally, too. Hockey season starting here this week. So, listen, I'm here, I'm there, I'm everywhere, baby. I ain't, much like Deion Sanders always says, I ain't hard to find.
And before we end this, funny thing is, I've talked to Wesley before, and it was for like an interview for school. But we met in Latrobe, which was fun. Latrobe is a great time.
Oh, buddy,
is the place to be if you're in Latrobe. But this ain't the first time we met. But that's gonna do it here. Thanks for Wesley Uhler for joining the podcast. Catch him on In the Gun on the Steelers Audio Network, and that's gonna do it here. Have a great one, folks.